Welcome everybody to the very first episode of The Naked Scientist. My name is Erika and today we're going to talk about invasive species. So, I don't know what about you guys, but whenever I hear the word invasive species, I instantly think horrible, malevolent creatures whose aim in life is to kill everything surrounding them. I'm here today with a talented and expert scientist on the subject, Dr. Eve Baxter, head of the Department of Ecology at the University of Aberdeen. Hi Eve. So, can you talk a little bit about what invasive species actually is and what turns a non-invasive species into an invasive species in the first place?
Hi there, Erica. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. So, non-native species are those animals or plants that don't naturally occur in an area, but have been moved there by human activity. If these species begin to spread and cause damage, then they are called invasive species. Unfortunately, they are extremely successful, and that's because of some defining characteristics. So, to start with, they typically have a short generation time or a short time between generations, and the ability to produce a lot of offspring. They are also able to disperse fairly quickly and thus compete with native wildlife for resources.
Okay, so invasive species can be considered as one of the key factors driving the extinctions of local species. You mentioned that they are transported by human activities though. Can you clarify this point?
Yeah, sure. So basically, since the 1500s, we humans have been able to break down physical barriers like oceans or mountains that have once separated species, transporting and releasing them somewhere else. Sometimes this occurs deliberately through the likes of sports fishing, aquaculture or agriculture, or just accidentally via travel.
Amazing! So, I'd like to introduce now Sel, a farmer whose livelihood is constantly put at risk by a particularly common species, the water hyacinth, which is considered one of the world's worst invasive aquatic plant. Sel, I understand that this plant has not only affected you, but also the ecosystem surrounding it as well.
Hello everybody. Yes, you are absolutely right. Water hyacinth grows incredibly quickly and has been clogging up waterways and causing irrigation issues and preventing light and oxygen to other plants. In fact, we even saw an increase in host snails for schistosomiasis cases and picky mosquitoes because of this.
Sounds dreadful. So, is this a common thing with invasive species then? Are they all just doom and gloom, or is there a way in which we can control them so they don't have as much of a bad effect?
It's funny you should say that, actually. We've been able to utilize water hyacinth as a way to remove toxins from the water, especially in wastewater treatments and agricultural runoffs, which this makes the water a hell lot of a saver. We have also learned that it might also be used as mulch or compost during a crop production, but the craziest thing happens when you use compost from worms that have been fed with this weed, and it becomes then sterile and stops proliferating. On top of that, local business have started to dry out the weed and turn it into ropes, generally paper or baskets. Amazing, isn't it? This helps us add a beneficial value to our community.
Wow, I'm googling these handbags and I definitely need one of them to make up for my terrible taste in clothing. Anyway, this does make me think that before we can even begin to discuss management control, we should stop and think whether we can use invasive species to our benefit. Especially because management control is a very expensive business, isn't it?
That's correct. There are high labor costs on controlling invasive species.
That's a lot of money. So, Sel, tell me, how do these people perceive these organisms? I'm guessing it's not easy to make people like them, especially who, like yourself, have to deal with them on a daily basis.
I think it very much depends on where you live. For example, here where I live, our community has learned how to coexist with them, so...
Yeah, I think you touched on a really important topic there, Erica. So several studies have focused on how public attitudes may have important consequences for environmental policies and control management. So Australia actually has been facing the threat of the cane toads, an invasive species which poses a serious threat to biodiversity and has embarked on a multi-million-dollar campaign to eradicate them. So a study a few years ago showed that those who viewed nature as delicate and pristine perceived non-native species as more severe than those who viewed nature as more robust. Additionally, people seem to have more negative attitudes towards those invasive species who have been in an area for less time, whereas communities where this animal has been around for ages showed a more positive attitude. So your question makes total sense. Public opinion can be a very effective vector for raising awareness of invasive species, but at the same time it is flawed based on personal opinion, which sometimes doesn't really reflect reality.
Wow, that is so interesting, how non-expert attitudes can actually influence management control. How important is it then to know a species ecology before we go about eradicating them?
Well, we do need to know more stuff about a particular invasive species before we decide to spend all of our hard-earned money on eradicating them, that's for sure, yes. Another example could be an invasive species like the European crab, who feeds on huge quantities of shellfish and then outcompetes local species as well as threatens commercial fishing. But however, by stealing the burrow nests of the nearby marsh crab, making them more vulnerable to predation, it has been found that this invasive species also aids the recovery of New England's heavily degraded salt marshes.
That's great. So thank you for joining us, guys. We've seen that invasive species are all over the world, mainly because of us. And we're causing lots of problems to the ecosystem and to the communities that depend on them. We must not generalize and take a deep look into each case, because their eradication may be really expensive. But if we take a balance on the positive and negatives, maybe we'll be able to avoid that cost and take profit in another way. At the end of the day, aren't we human and invasive species ourselves? I'll leave you with this question. Thank you to our guest. Thank you for being with us, and to you, all listeners. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Bye, guys!